Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. High-profile crimes committed with extreme brutality often send shockwaves through communities and trigger widespread public concern. When the person responsible remains at large, the fear of another incident looms over residents, and no one can predict when or where it might happen next. In small towns, such horrifying violations of the law can become part of local lore, but sometimes the nature of the offense and the investigation itself lead to precedent-setting changes in the criminal justice system, including the adoption of new laws or amendments to existing ones. More than 2 decades ago, in the quiet town of Las Cruces, New Mexico, a particularly disturbing act of aggression was committed against a young college student named Katie Sepik. To this day, it stands as one of the most chilling and violent incidents in the city's history. Although the crime could have been solved swiftly, flaws within the judicial framework caused significant delays, stretching the investigation over several years. It wasn't until Katie's grieving family stepped in and pushed for change that progress was made. Their efforts led to the introduction of a legal measure named in her honor, a law that mandates DNA sampling from anyone arrested in connection with aggressive behavior or violent acts. This crucial step aimed to close the gaps in the system and prevent similar delays in identifying perpetrators in the future. Catherine Jenna Sepich, or simply Katie as her friends called her, was born on July 18, 1981, in the suburbs of Las Cruces, located in Doña Ana County, New Mexico. She was the oldest of 3 siblings in a close-knit and loving family. Growing up alongside her younger brother and sister, Katie shared a strong bond with them. Her parents, committed to raising their children with strong values, prioritized education and encouraged each of them to explore and develop their talents. Katie stood out in school. A dedicated student, she ranked among the top in her class. She had a natural affinity for the sciences, and as graduation approached, she set her sights on the economics program at New Mexico State University. When she shared her decision with her parents, they were thrilled, not just because of her ambition, but also because the university was nearby in Las Cruces, meaning she could visit home often. Instead of living in the dorms, Katie chose to rent a small apartment with a close friend. Their unit was on the ground floor of a residential complex. Each had her own bedroom, and it was only about a 10-minute walk to campus. During her junior year, Katie met a fellow student named Joshua, or Joe, as his friends called him, Bischoff. He was a year older, studying biochemistry at the same university. The connection between them was instant. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and within a few months, they had introduced each other to their families, both of whom gave their full support. Joe was originally from Albuquerque, the capital of New Mexico. He planned to return there after graduation to work at his family's business. This inevitably meant that he and Katie would face a long-distance relationship for a while, as she still had 1 year left to complete her degree. But just before leaving town, Joe proposed. He gave her a beautiful custom-made diamond ring, and Katie joyfully accepted. The plan was simple. They'd get married right after she graduated, then settle down together in Albuquerque. With Joe now living in another city, they could only see each other during holidays. Still, they talked every day, staying connected despite the distance. Nearly a full year passed like this. In late August 2003, Joe returned to Las Cruces to spend Labor Day weekend with his fiancée. He stayed at the apartment Katie still shared with her friend. Since each roommate had her own room, the setup was comfortable, and no one felt like they were intruding. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, the couple planned to attend a party at a large house rented by another student. It was one of those big college gatherings, and many attendees intended to stay overnight. There was nothing unusual or alarming about the evening at first. Katie and Joe were overjoyed to be reunited. Joe had arrived on Friday, August 29th, and the couple had spent almost every moment together since. Their affection for each other was strong, and their time together was filled with emotional and physical closeness, cherishing every second. Around 8 p.m., Katie, Joe, and her roommate headed to the party together. The scene was lively and crowded. People were dancing, celebrating, and consuming quite a bit of alcohol. At some point, Katie and Joe got into a heated argument. No one at the party paid much attention to the details of the dispute, likely because most were intoxicated and preoccupied with their own fun. Around 3 a.m., an upset Katie suddenly decided to leave the house where the party was being held and head back to her apartment. She simply walked out, and no one thought to stop her. Later, partygoers said they hadn't noticed when she left and assumed she'd be back. After all, her belongings were still at the house. None of her friends offered to walk her home. By the afternoon of August 31st, 2003, the Sepik household received a phone call. Katie's mother, Jane Sepik, answered and heard the worried voice of her daughter's roommate on the other end. The caller asked if Katie had gone to visit her family. When Jane said no, the friend revealed that Katie had gone missing after the party and hadn't returned or contacted anyone. Jane later recalled a sinking feeling that something terrible had happened. Her eldest daughter would never just vanish without letting someone know. Concerned, the family and friends of the student immediately contacted law enforcement to file a missing persons report and began organizing their own search. That same day, closer to the evening, another call came into the local police, this time with horrifying news. A group of hunters had come across the body of a young woman near the edge of town at a municipal landfill. Disturbed by the discovery, they contacted authorities right away. The victim was lying face down. Her clothes had been mostly removed, and her undergarments were torn. Her jeans were ripped and pulled down to her ankles. The scene strongly suggested a violent and targeted assault. There was no form of identification found with her, but due to the missing persons report already on file for Katie, investigators immediately suspected the body might be hers. There were severe burn marks on the woman's back and arms. As it would later be confirmed, the person responsible had attempted to destroy the evidence by pouring gasoline and setting the body on fire. However, the attempt failed. The fire only singed the skin and quickly burned out, leaving behind crucial forensic evidence, including DNA. When authorities contacted the Sepik family to inform them that a woman's body had been discovered and that it could be Katie, the news left them devastated. Katie's father went to identify the remains. Despite the condition of the body, he immediately recognized his daughter. All hopes that she might still be alive were shattered. An autopsy confirmed what many feared. Katie had been the victim of an extremely aggressive and violent attack. The cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxiation. The perpetrator had taken her life by strangling her with their bare hands. Defensive wounds were present all over her body and arms, indicating she had fought fiercely to survive. Under her fingernails, examiners found traces of skin and blood, suggesting she had scratched her attacker in the struggle. From the biological material collected, both from the body and under her nails, forensic experts were able to extract the DNA of the person responsible. The sample was submitted to the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This indicated that the individual had likely never been arrested for a violent offense before, or hadn't been entered into the system at all. At the location where the body was discovered, there were no traces of blood, no signs of a struggle, and none of Katie's clothing or shoes, a clear indication that the crime had occurred elsewhere. Detectives handling the investigation now faced the challenge of determining the original scene of the attack and narrowing down the list of potential suspects. The distance between the house where the party was held and the apartment Katie shared with her roommate was about 1.5 miles. Since she had left on foot, it would have taken her roughly 30 minutes to walk home. But which route did she take? Investigators decided to explore all possible paths and search for anyone who might have seen her that night. Unfortunately, no clues were found along the way, and no eyewitnesses came forward, likely because Katie had walked alone through deserted streets in the middle of the night. However, one crucial piece of evidence was discovered right outside her apartment building. Her right shoe was lying beneath the window of her unit, and the other was found closer to the roadside. It appeared that Katie had left the party while visibly upset and under the influence. In her haste, She forgot her purse, which contained her phone and keys. When she arrived at her apartment, she realized she couldn't get inside and likely decided to try climbing through her bedroom window. It was during that vulnerable moment that the perpetrator struck. Signs of a struggle were found in the gravel below the window, and later, medical examiners discovered small fragments of that same gravel embedded in her skin. Back in 2003, outdoor surveillance cameras weren't as widespread or reliable as they are today. Footage from 2 nearby cameras managed to capture brief moments of Katie's walk that night, confirming her direction and general route. But it brought investigators no closer to identifying the individual responsible. The surveillance tapes were examined frame by frame. Nothing suspicious was visible. Katie wasn't running, no one seemed to be following her, and there were no suspicious vehicles or figures in sight. Based on this, detectives theorized that she had encountered the person who harmed her during the final leg of her walk, a stretch that unfortunately had no surveillance coverage at all. Police interviewed everyone who had attended the party, the last one Katie would ever go to, but didn't gather anything substantial. Most guests had left before she had a dispute with her boyfriend, Joe. Those who had stayed were either too intoxicated to recall details or had already gone to sleep by the time she left. Some assumed she would return, while others thought Joe would go after her. Katie's close friend and roommate recalled that Joe, after drinking heavily, had begun flirting with another guest, and that girl ended up kissing him. Katie saw this unfold, which sparked the argument between the couple. They had a heated exchange that lasted around 10 minutes. Eventually, things seemed to cool down, and most assumed the conflict was over. But about 30 minutes later, Katie, still visibly hurt, decided to leave. It's likely she expected Joe to follow her. Interestingly, Joe did in fact go after Katie that night, but he came back soon after. He called her phone, only to hear it ringing from her purse, which had been left on the couch. Strangely, he kept calling over and over again, as if ignoring the ringtone coming from right beside him. This behavior raised red flags for detectives, and they decided to bring Joe in for a formal interview at the station. There, his nervousness became more apparent. He struggled to keep his story straight. He said he had followed Katie to make sure she got home safely, but somehow lost sight of her. According to him, he made it to her building, but didn't see her there, so he simply returned to the party. When asked why he didn't knock on her door or try to confirm she got in safely, he didn't have a clear answer. When detectives informed Joe that biological evidence had been recovered from the victim and asked him to voluntarily provide a DNA sample, his demeanor changed. He immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to answer further questions. That reaction only deepened suspicions against him. At the time, law enforcement could not compel someone to submit a DNA sample without a court order, and Joe's attorney worked aggressively to prevent that from happening. So investigators had to look for another legal way to obtain the evidence they needed. As previously mentioned, Joe and Katie had been physically intimate the night before the incident. In her bedroom at the apartment she shared with a friend, detectives retrieved the bedsheets, hoping to find usable biological material. It's worth noting that every other male guest who had been at the party fully cooperated with police and agreed to submit a DNA sample to clear their name. Testing on the bedsheet revealed traces of male DNA, but it did not match the material found under Katie's fingernails or on her body. Once Joe learned this, he voluntarily agreed to provide his own DNA sample. He later explained that he had initially refused because he feared being falsely accused. Since he had been intimate with Katie that night, he believed his DNA might still be present and misinterpreted. The brutal crime against a college student in what had always been considered a peaceful town quickly became the most talked-about story in the region. Rumors began circulating about a potential serial predator traveling between states, targeting women walking alone at night and committing disturbing offenses. Detectives recognized the gravity of the situation. They launched an extensive investigation, combing through other cases involving similar attacks or attempted assaults. They also sent out a federal request to cross-check DNA from unsolved crimes nationwide. The goal was to determine whether the individual behind Katie's case had committed similar offenses elsewhere. Despite their efforts, no matches were found in the national database. The investigation quickly hit a dead end, and meanwhile, panic was growing in Las Cruces. The school year had just begun, but many young women were too frightened to walk alone, especially after dark, fearing they might become the next target of a violent offender. No one in town felt truly safe while the person responsible was still out there. One possible motive investigators considered was robbery. Several witnesses from the party recalled that Katie had been wearing her diamond engagement ring that evening, a gift from Joe. But the ring was missing from her body, and it wasn't found anywhere near the scene. That strongly suggested the person who committed the act had taken it with them. Once this detail became public, women across the city stopped wearing expensive jewelry in public, hoping to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Even though no new crimes followed Katie's case, the atmosphere in town remained tense, and the public demanded justice. A check of local pawn shops turned up nothing. The missing ring hadn't been sold or traded anywhere in the county. However, detectives found a different lead: tire tracks at the landfill, near where Katie's body had been left. The tread pattern was clear enough to identify the manufacturer and model of the tires. It turned out they were commonly used on pickup trucks. But how could investigators track down a specific vehicle without a license plate number, make, or even a color? The case stalled again. By early 2004, the investigation into Katie Sepic's case had all but come to a standstill. Then in July, nearly a year after her death, news broke of a strikingly similar incident, one that took place in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A young woman had been attacked in a manner that mirrored the details of Katie's case. She was beaten, subjected to a brutal assault, and then the attacker tried to set her body on fire. Because of the similarities, authorities began to suspect a serial offender might be involved. Incredibly, despite the severity of her injuries, the Green Bay survivor managed to live. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and all investigators could do was hope she'd pull through and be able to talk. Fortunately, doctors stabilized her condition quickly, and within days, she was well enough to speak with detectives. According to her account, she was attacked by two men of Latino descent. They stole her bag, beat her, subjected her to repeated aggression, and then began strangling her. It's believed she lost consciousness, which may have ultimately saved her life. Her attackers assumed she was gone, attempted to burn her body, but the flames quickly went out. They didn't stay to check. Hours later, she regained consciousness and managed to crawl to the roadside, where passing drivers spotted her. Thanks to her testimony, composite sketches of both suspects were created and broadcast in the evening news, along with a plea for the public to help identify the men thought to be behind a string of violent attacks targeting women. That very night, a local farmer called police. He recognized the men in the sketches as two of his seasonal workers, Gregory Morales and Giovanni Niatu. Notably, both men were originally from New Mexico and had reportedly traveled there from time to time to visit family. It seemed that both of the violent crimes were on the verge of being solved. All investigators needed were DNA samples from the suspects. But sensing that the authorities were closing in, both men went on the run. It took another 3 months before they were finally arrested in Atlanta, Georgia. However, what came next was a major letdown for the team working on Katie's case. While there was no doubt that Morales and Niatu were involved in the Green Bay attack, the DNA samples collected from them did not match the profile found on Katie Sepic's body. There was no connection to the crime in Las Cruces. The investigation into Katie Sepic's case hit another wall. Despite the passage of more than 2 years, her family refused to let the story fade into the background. They kept the pressure on, engaging the public and reminding everyone that a dangerous individual was still at large. Then, in December 2006, nearly 3.5 years after the brutal crime, a major breakthrough finally came. A DNA profile submitted to the national database matched the unknown sample taken from Katie's body. The match belonged to Gabriel Avila, a repeat offender with prior convictions for armed robbery, assault against women, and the distribution of prohibited substances. For reasons that remain deeply troubling, Gabriel had never been required to submit a DNA sample before, even though his criminal history included at least 2 serious assault cases. In those instances, his guilt had been established without forensic evidence, so no one had pushed for the additional testing. That oversight would prove to have devastating consequences. Incredibly, Avila had already been arrested just 2 months after Katie's death, when he tried to attack another woman. He had broken into her apartment through a window and assaulted her in her sleep, but failed to notice her roommate was in the room. The 2 women managed to fight him off, locked themselves in the bathroom with a phone, and called emergency services. Despite this, Gabriel not only avoided serious punishment, investigators never even collected his DNA at the time. Complications in the case and a skillful defense attorney resulted in Avila being released under a promise not to leave town. Unsurprisingly, he disappeared soon afterward. And because no formal conviction followed, the case was quietly dropped. It also came to light that Gabriel owned a pickup truck, a detail that might have been significant had it been followed up back then. Now, with new momentum in the case, detectives turned to his ex-wife, who had been living with him around the time the crime occurred. She was cooperative and provided key information. Most notably, she mentioned finding an expensive diamond ring in the glove compartment of his truck. The ring wasn't her size, so she assumed it belonged to another woman, possibly someone Avila was secretly seeing. She decided to keep the ring as proof of his infidelity, planning to confront him later. But before she had the chance, Gabriel was arrested and eventually disappeared again while out on bond. The woman turned over the piece of jewelry to the police. It was the very same custom-made engagement ring Joe had given to Katie. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Now, all that remained was to get a confession from the man responsible, who, until then, had continued to deny everything. But the moment detectives placed the ring in front of him, his demeanor changed. He seemed defeated, realizing the evidence was stacked against him. The only thing he asked was how they had found the item he thought was long gone. With any lingering doubts about Gabriel Avila's involvement laid to rest, he finally decided to tell his version of what had happened, trying to downplay his responsibility in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. According to his statement, that tragic night he had gone to a friend's place to buy some prohibited substances, which he then used immediately. On his way back, he spotted Katie walking alone down the street and offered her a ride, which she declined. Avila claimed he didn't follow her, only wanted to make sure she got home safely. But when he saw her trying to climb into her apartment through the window, he approached and launched his attack. He insisted he had no intent to harm her at first, blaming his impaired state of mind on the substances he had taken. After assaulting her, he realized the severity of what he had done. In a panic and desperate to cover his tracks, he decided to take her life. Gabriel strangled Katie with his bare hands, then placed her body in the bed of his truck and drove to a landfill outside the city. Before trying to destroy the evidence by setting the body on fire, he removed the ring from her finger, thinking it might be recognized. He doused the body in gasoline, ignited it, and left the scene, unaware that the fire had barely burned and much of the forensic evidence remained intact. Gabriel Avila finally stood trial in May 2007, nearly 4 years after committing the brutal act. He was found guilty of assault, battery, aggression, homicide, and robbery. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison without the possibility of parole. But Katie's parents didn't stop there. With strong support from the public, they fought to pass legislation requiring mandatory DNA collection from anyone convicted, or even arrested, for violent crimes. Had that law been in place in 2003, Avila could have been linked to the crime just months after Katie's death, not years later. Today, that legislation carries her name, Katie Sepich's Law. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.